I know what you're asking. Did you say you have a map of this? Not really. But I sort of have a map of this.
Middle East.
I have a Middle East map. This is the first Gulf War, but the countries are still there, right? So you can look at the countries.
Where did they go?
Right. So take out the bombings and stuff on this. That's not there. Israel had fought several wars. So literally, when the UN declared them a nation, they got bombed the next day. They started the 48 war. And then in 1967, and this won't be on the test, but in 1967, the Israelis got wind that Egypt and Jordan and Syria were going to be attacking them. Their intelligence told them this. Israel fights pretty fiercely. What's one reason why Israel fights pretty well?
Because they're brilliant.
Because they have all America's coolest stuff. Because they've got better weapons. One reason is they got better weapons than their foes do, because we sell them really cool stuff. They do fight pretty fiercely. A lot of the rules that Americans have, like, we don't want to hurt this village now, the Israelis don't always necessarily hold the same problem. If they know there's a terrorist in that building's going to the ground. And it was your own effing fault that you happened to be there with them. If you want to live, don't hang out with a terrorist. That is the Israeli mantra. Andrew's like, I can get behind that logic. People, if anyone actually watches all of these things, they'll be like, who is this Andrew person? Why does he? Because every now and again I say something, and I'm like, I wonder if people at home think Andrew's like.
I think he's Reagan, probably.
Yeah.
Reincarnated.
Yeah, if there's like because I have 160 subscribers, I wonder if there's like somebody who's bored and watch all of them, and like, I wonder what this Hannah person's actually like. How many scarves can one person have?
I have a lot.
And Mary seems to carry on a conversation with Mr. Sayre the whole time. And why does Duncan keep walking across? Who's the guy who keeps walking across? Can't he walk behind it? The attack in 1967 was called the 6 Days War. It was called that for a pretty specific reason. The war didn't last real long. And in the end, the people who got really screwed out of this was the Palestinians. Palestine was a large area. I'm going to draw it. This should help out a lot. You'll never guess what it's going to look like.
A square.
A circle, no, a square. I'm trying to make it accurate. Well, when the UN in the 1940s, the end of World War II, the country of Israel gets sort of carved out of Palestine. All right. So there's already animosity there. And then after the 1967 6 Days War, a lot of Palestine, like the Israelis, sort of just start taking over this area. And for almost 60 years, Palestinians have lived in cities, but oftentimes in refugee camps. I mean, 10, 15, 20,000 people in these refugee camps. Unemployment in this area is massively high, 50, 60, 70% in some areas. And the hatred of Israel is real, it's palpable. And if you want to be popular in the Middle East, just say bad things about Israel and give some money to the Palestinians. The funny part about it is most people like Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, they don't want Palestine to be its own country. If they would, they'd push harder diplomatically, but it's easier for them to get points for being pro-Muslim to say something about the Palestinians who are always being screwed over by the Israelis. But in 1967, this area is now sort of going to be dominated by the Israelis and used as a buffer against outside forces. Well, in 1973, another war occurred, and it was called the Yom Kippur War. Yom Kippur is one of the two high holidays in the Jewish calendar. People think that like Hanukkah is a really big... Hanukkah is not a huge deal in the Jewish calendar. You know what the two biggest is? Yom Kippur, and the other one is?
We know a lot about
Rosh Hashanah. On Yom Kippur, the coalition of I think it was Egypt, maybe part of Saudi Arabia, Jordan, they attacked Israel on Yom Kippur. And this war did take longer. And America sided with Israel. Well, at the time, and it's really funny because you're like the first generation of kids who grow up not fearing OPEC. You've heard of OPEC though, right?
Yes.
The Organization for Petroleum Exporting Countries, most of these, the biggest oil producing countries were Middle Eastern countries. Venezuela is part of it too. Today, in the last 2 or 3 years, America has either produced a lot of our own oil or we get it more from Canada or Mexico. We get very little oil from Saudi Arabia anymore. That is pretty recent development. But they decided to embargo, they were going to sell America no oil. And so what's going to happen in America?
Gas lines.
Gas prices are going to go up, but it's not just gas prices.
Everything else goes up.
Everything.
Yeah, because transportation costs are embedded as an input cost into food and everything. So we start seeing inflation. The 60s, the end of the 60s, early 70s was already seeing inflation because of our spending on the Vietnam War and because of entitlement stuff and all the government spending. Now you throw this on top of it and you start seeing inflation be a huge deal. We're going to talk a lot about inflation next week. But around the country, like, this creates shortages of gas. And what states did was they, like, if your license plate ended with an odd number, you would have gas on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. If it was an even number, you could only get gas on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Saturdays. And Sundays will be closed altogether. You might see lines of gas people parked all the way around the block to get gas. Gas got up to like $1.25 a gallon, which in 1973 was a lot of money for a gallon of gas.
My mom remembers that. She said she hated it.
Yeah, no one liked it.
I love gas.
But yeah, it was, and the problem, one of the problems was that in the 1960s, instead of the 1970s, if you wanted a car that went faster, well, some engineers today might say, well, make your car out of lighter material. No, what you make your car is bigger with a larger engine. And that's how you get like muscle cars, right? And that's how they were just gas-sucking cars. And these muscle cars dominated. They were really kind of crappy. Cars did not last that long, right? Today, I have a crappy Honda Accord that only has 206,000 miles on it, right? No one had that kind of car in the 1970s. It just fell apart. And the gas mileage was awful. You're talking like 8 or 9 miles per gallon. Gas, but when I was a little kid, you could either get regular or unleaded gas. Leaded gas was very bad for the environment. Today, when you get regular, it's regular unleaded, right? It's like 87 octane, or you can get different kinds of octanes. But like leaded gas was, you had 2 different lines. Like in the gas stations, you had these pumps were leaded and these pumps were unleaded. And older cars got leaded gas. Like, you ever see like those old, like, full vans, right? Like the creeper vans and stuff? Those... Right, Hannah, you know. People at home, I thought Hannah liked scarves and French.
Robin's on the big picture.
Yeah, those were leaded. Do what?
There's a kid that graduated that has a van like that, and it says Creeper across the front, and he literally calls it his Creeper van.
Yeah, so.
Okay.
It's Anderson County.
Alright, so the response, well, what's important about this? What should we take away from this occurrence? If you're trying to analyze this historically, look at America's power. Is America's power limitless?
No.
We live in a world, up until this point, like in the 40s and 50s, America was the biggest producer of oil in the world. But what happens is now, energy is becoming a big deal. And America's power is limited due to an economic outside force, right? We're going to live with this. What a lot of conservatives have argued in the last couple of years is that by getting our own energy independence, we can make a bigger impact around the world because we won't be tied to these dictators. Liberals have the same thing. What's the difference between them though? How you get the energy, right? Conservatives are more worried about drilling in America, tapping natural gas, fracking, stuff like that. Liberals are going to be more, well, we need sustainable energy and clean energy. And those are the big differences. Liberals and conservatives alike do not want to be dependent on Saudi Arabia for our oil, right? No one thinks it's a good idea, except the Saudis. But this is sort of where we're at. But the war is going to bring up two big issues. One of them is America's role is going to be diminished in terms of our power to negotiate because of our need for oil. And our relationship with Israel becomes a big deal. Right? It was a big deal before, but now, have you noticed that every presidential candidate basically has to make out with Israel to show that they're pro-Israel? Obama got killed on that during the election cycle because he had not made an official visit to Israel. And Romney said very loudly that on his first official visit would be to Israel. And his first official acts would all be like real pro-Israel stuff. People care a lot, and the reasons are kind of depressing. Did you know there are actually more Mormon people in America than Jewish people?
Yeah.
There are more Muslims than there are Jewish people. So why do people need to love Israel as a domestic issue? It's called the Israel Lobby. The Israel Lobby is considered right below like the NRA and the AARP as being one of the most powerful lobby groups in America.
But why do regular people care about that? I understand why politicians
It's
care.
way worse. Why do average Southern evangelicals care? Because for religious reasons. Number one, this is the birthplace of Jesus. Fundamentalists think that it's biblical is that when you have a strong Israel and Israel's protected, it will bring on the second coming. Dun, dun, dun.
I feel like that's kind of intense.
It is intense. People have their different reasons for supporting Israel. One, and this makes sense, it's really the only pro-American democracy in the Middle East. Right? It is a democracy. It is pro-American. It's the only pro-American country, but it's the only one that's blatantly pro-American. Jordan and Egypt are pro-American, the government is, but the people aren't pro-American. In Israel, it's the only pro-American joint going. So from that perspective, it makes strategic sense. Many intellectuals have argued that being pro-Israel has cost us a lot. That if our policy shifted, it would force Israel to not rely on American money and weaponry and loyalty, and it'll force the Israelis to go to the bargaining table and give up a little bit for the Palestinians and create a two-state solution between Palestine and Israel. I don't know the answer, but no politician can win saying we're going to favor the Palestinians over the Israelis. The next commercial is you standing next to Osama bin Laden, shaking hands and walking your kittens.
I bet Osama
Yes.
loves kittens.
I always walk my